For the past 4 years or so, I've considered this mouse my main, the HSK Pro. I've spent time with other popular picks and other fingertip mice, but the HSK Pro was the only one that offered me that ultra fingertip-centric experience that I came to love. It was so deep into its niche that I went as far as to say, as an HSK Pro fan, I don't know when something else that small and precise will come around commercially, so we might just be waiting on modders to keep pushing that niche. But since then, G-Wolves, in all of their insanity, has made 2 new mice that seem to fit into that niche. The spiritual successor to the HSK Pro, called the Fenrir Pro, and the literal successor, the HSK Pro 2. Without a doubt, between one of these 2 mice, I will have a new main. So let's talk about what's changed. We'll start with the HSK Pro 2. This is a mouse that I was vaguely aware was coming for a couple months, and G-Wolves had teased that they had a 14-gram mouse on the horizon. But when the HSK Pro 2 was announced, it wasn't it. Here's the real patch notes. They upgraded the MCU, bringing up the sense of performance and allowing for a mode enabling more responsive clicks. They changed the connector to USB-C and allowed for higher polling rate while wired, which I actually kinda like for ripping out the battery and running a lightweight cable. They changed out the switches to something much lighter, which actually was one of my main complaints in the V1. And they said they brought their weight down by 4 grams. Not huge changes, but it's still my favorite shape of all time, and any level of improvement was more than welcome. So, the Fenrir Pro. If you've seen my fingertip tier list, you probably know that the Fenrir series was one of the biggest disappointments I've ever had in the hobby. They were the first mice to iterate on the HSK Pro, but in terms of aiming experience, they felt so different. All because of one factor: width. Part of what made the HSK Pro so unique was how it promoted this angle on your fingers, a pinch grip of sorts, that really defined that pen-like experience. But even just a few millimeters of width difference was enough to make that experience completely go away. So where does the Fenrir Pro stand in terms of width? It's in the middle. The HSK Pro has a width of 53 millimeters, the ASIM 60, and the Fenrir Pro was 57. It was entirely possible that it could still create that feeling of finger engagement with a middle ground width like that. On top of that, this one actually does have all of the G-Wolves modernizations. It's got the baseless design, it's below 20 grams, a super low button height, and top-of-the-line tech. Right before I got it, I was chatting with the G-Wolves owner, telling him how excited I was for this mouse, and he said I should be, because it's basically the same shape as the HSK Pro. But my first impressions were that this thing felt completely different, to the point where I don't even think they're in the same niche. How is that possible if the outlines look like this on eloshapes and the difference in width is, 3 millimeters? But that difference reminded me of another purchase I made recently, a speedcube. I was in the market for a new speedcube, so I went through a bunch of different options and eventually settled on one of the new flagship releases from GAN, because I was mostly interested in what new tech had come out since I last quit. The GAN 16 was the flagship with all of those bells and whistles, and it costed a pretty penny because of that. The GAN V100 was like the budget version of that, boasting most of the same specs at half the price. But every review I watched on it spent just as much time talking about its size. How you can immediately tell how much smaller it is, how it's good for one-handed cubing, or how it suits people with smaller hands better. All of those comments got me curious. Just how much smaller is the V100 compared to standard speedcubes? And the difference in size is 1 millimeter. It's 55 millimeters instead of 56. These types of differences are things that have to be felt to be understood. People bring up so many mice that are supposedly OP1 clones, but once you try both of them side by side in your hands, they feel almost nothing alike. Subtle differences in width or curvature can make for huge differences towards in-hand feel, and something like that isn't going to be really represented from just an outline comparison. So I was kind of disappointed. It wasn't the mouse I thought it would be, and it diverged from what made the original so special. But I kept using it anyway. My HSK scroll wheel finally started breaking down, and that meant that I used this mouse for a lot of my daily activities, and it stayed on my desk a lot. Every day that I used it, I found I started liking the mouse more and more. Instead of seeing it as this failed clone of the HSK, I started to see it as its own thing. And that thing was everything I originally wanted out of the Fenrir series. I mentioned in my review of the other Fenrirs that they felt really good for stability and it was way easier to use your arm with compared to the HSK Pro. But it came at a cost of fingertip mobility, and for me, it was too much. This mouse doesn't have that problem. You get all of those stability benefits and I get maybe 80% of my fingertip engagement. In some cases, it's even better than the HSK Pro in that regard, because there are far fewer situations where I feel the need to tense my fingers. Using and blending with muscle groups other than my fingers felt so much easier too, even with all my HSK Pro experience. Another big reason for this is the boxiness of that shape. Compared to the HSK Pro, the inwards taper is much more subtle, which I guess is the main reason it doesn't create that pen-like sensation. Without the taper encouraging a pinch grip, you end up with a much more standard feeling experience, which for most people I think is a good thing. Button height is the other big change. Using smaller switches allows them to get these really deep comfort curves that get your fingers really close to the pad. It's not for everyone, but for me, it's just an upgrade. I think this mouse is really, really good. I've tried two now that both feel perfect, and I think this is just my new default recommendation for fingertip mice. I've kind of struggled giving suggestions for players who want a really optimized fingertip mouse since the ASIM, Max, and HSK Pro are so divisive, and the other options don't lean in nearly as hard as G-Wolves does. But this is it. If I had to put it on the tier list, it's definitely an S tier, and it's a pretty large power gap too. Before we move on, I want to quickly mention its issues. The first is the side buttons again. My thumb is pretty small, but without grip tape, I am bumping right up against the front side button. I honestly thought this would be a much bigger issue on the Fenrir ASIM though, and I haven't really heard that many complaints about it. Grip tape, which is pretty much necessary anyway, does make it a lot better. And then there's the base, or lack thereof. A lot of people say you can't use artisan dots or bigger skates on this mouse, and maybe much bigger skates would be a problem, but I don't think having a little bit of overhang on the artisan dots really does anything to the gaming experience. I used it for a couple of weeks and I thought it was totally fine. That's pretty much it though. Of course it will be a bit more fragile than most mice, but it's quite sturdy for what it is. But my new main isn't decided yet. We still have to talk about the HSK Pro 2. Out of the box, this mouse felt pretty much exactly the same as the V1, which for a V2 coming out 4 years after the original, that's not exactly the unboxing experience that you want. The first thing I noticed was the weight. When the last mouse I used was the Fenrir Pro, there is a feeling of denseness here. When doing quick motions in the air, you can feel that every motion carries quite a bit more momentum, and it does add up over the course of a game or a run. In the grand scheme of things, it's absolutely splitting hairs, but it's the type of thing you notice when you use them back to back. It's smaller and 50% heavier after all. But the weight overall should be a bit better, right? Well, I don't know if it's just my scale or my copy or what, but it looks like it's exactly the same. I asked around and got similar testimonies, with everybody's copies landing around 29 and 30 grams. As for the sensor performance, yeah, it's good, I guess. All I wanted was for my favorite shape to get the modern G-Wolves treatment, and it's just the exact same mouse. Just imagine, 14 to 20 grams, using those same half-size switches to lower the button height. Maybe a bit of iteration of the taper, it would have been like the best mouse ever. It took me a couple of weeks to have my thoughts on these mice fully mature. I realized that my feelings towards these mice were like how you initially feel about a twist ending. The entire time, it feels like the story is building up to something, throwing you hints and details that constantly get you to update your internal prediction. And when you finally get there, it reframes all of those thoughts and experiences. The HSK Pro 2 is the story that's always building up to this huge cathartic moment, like unraveling a mystery. And the real explanation was pedestrian and understated. It creates this feeling of indignation, like they didn't even try. It makes you question, well, what was even the point of all that? But after sitting with that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. While it wasn't the grand transformative experience I was hoping for, the more I sat with it, the more okay I became with it. I was hoping for a transformation like the HTS to the HTS Ultra, but what I got was the OP18K to the OP18K V2. While it wasn't worth upgrading from the V1 to the V2, it was a nice little value add for anybody who didn't already have one. Unless you went into it expecting something transformative, most people saw that as a good thing. The Fenrir Pro is the twist ending that rattles you. It reframes the entire story in a way that makes you distant from the emotions you experienced leading up to it. But as you think about it more, you begin to realize that the twist is so much better than the ending you saw coming in your head, and it becomes hard to even imagine it ending in any other way. It's perfect, just not in the way you expected it to be. With all that said, we get a bit more perspective. Both of these, based on the criteria I set out in my fingertip tier list, are S-tier mice. They are at the very top of their respective niches. There really is no other mouse like the HSK Pro, and the experience is uniquely its own within the market. I still love this thing, but between these two mice, I would recommend the Fenrir Pro 9 times out of 10. On paper, it's just the better mouse. There's a significantly lower chance you'll hate it, and it has a much more forgiving learning curve. This mouse even got viscose to finally click with the fingertip mouse too, and that's something that nothing else in my collection has ever done. So if that pen-like experience appeals to you, or if you just want the most unique FPS experience a mouse can offer, that's where the HSK Pro wins. I still hope that one day we will see a real modernization of the HSK Pro, but I can appreciate the improvements that we did get, small as they might be. So I still haven't answered the question. Which one of these mice will I main moving forwards? I can confidently say that I'm not sure, but that's honestly the last outcome I was expecting, and it's a testament to just how good the Fenrir Pro is, despite not being what I thought I wanted. It could go either way at this point, and it would take something leaning into the HSK Pro's niche even more to really shake up the matchup. Thanks for watching.